from. So all of the sets are based on fans and elements of the French court. The start of the ballet is set in the court of Louis XIV, or that was our starting point. We've then moved it on from there into a sort of fantasy version of that court. And of course, fans are very, very important in the sort of 16th, 17th, 18th century. So that was really where we came from. Well, we started off with the court, and the court are based on the first part of the ballet. The court is sort of loosely based on the court of Louis XIV. And then as we move through the ballet, we introduce the fantasy characters, the fairies, and they're very, very light, very delicate. I want them to look like they're sort of floating on air. So they're real fantasy creatures. Then we have, as we move through the ballet again, we see more realistic people. We see peasants doing country dancing. And we move on from there through into the hunt scene of Act Two, which has, again, much more naturalistic sort of costumes. And that moves into a fantasy world where we see the vision of Aurora and she comes to the prince. And so we're moving constantly between quite naturalistic worlds and real fantasy. And of course, that culminates in Act Three, where we have all the fairy tale characters who come to the wedding. We see Puss in Boots, we see Little Red Riding Hood, we see the white cat, we see the bluebird. And again, those elements that Cynthia, the choreographer, really wanted to emphasize and to develop those characters and those roles. Well, the set has an awful lot of gold in it, as you'd expect from something from Versailles, based on Versailles. And so I've wanted to really take very rich, strong colours into the costumes. So the prologue has reds, deep reds, rubies, those sorts of colours. Act One, which is in the garden of the palace, the costumes and the colours are very spring-like, European spring. So yellows, oranges, that sort of world, fresh greens. The world of the hunt is in the forest, so the surrounding world is green, and the costumes are traditional hunting red. And then when we move back into the court for the last scene, for the wedding, it's very gold, silver, and very, very strong colours for all the fairy tale characters who come into that world. I think the main inspiration has to be the music, really, for doing a ballet. That has to be the starting point. And of course, the music for Sleeping Beauty is just so sumptuous. It's completely inspiring just to listen to it, I think. And you're bound to start getting ideas just as you sit there listening to the recordings. Inspiration after that comes from different sources, I think. The choreographer obviously has a lot to put in and generates a lot of interesting and exciting ideas. And then I take those on and start looking through books of the period and reference paintings, and anything can spark something off there. It's one of the great classical ballets, and so we wanted to be very true to that. We've taken the fairy tale elements and made those very, very strong. It's a fantasy. We want it to be very beautiful. It's really one of those great ballets that every company needs to have in its repertoire, and we want to be faithful to that.